The show begins. Studio lights were bright, almost blinding, and the audience buzzed with excitement. Everyone was waiting for the show to start. It wasn't just any talk show. It was the Graham Norton Show, one of the biggest late-night programs in the world. Celebrities came, laughed, and shared funny stories. The crowd came for joy and jokes, not for seriousness. But tonight was different. Tonight the air felt heavy, even before the cameras rolled. Backstage, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his chair, his posture calm, his face humble. He wore simple clothes, not flashy, not screaming for attention. He never did. Most people, Keanu was known as the kind star of The Matrix and John Wick, but to those who had met him, he was something more gentle, thoughtful, and deeply private. He never liked the spotlight when it wasn't about his work. Interviews always made him uneasy, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew how easily words could be twisted. Still, he agreed to tonight's show out of respect. Graham Norton, the charming host known for humor and sharp wit, had promised the producers it would be lighthearted. But sometimes humor has teeth. The assistant knocked. "Mr. Reeves, we're ready for you." Keanu nodded, stood slowly, and walked toward the stage. The audience erupted in applause when he appeared. Their cheers were warm, genuine. Keanu bowed, his head in thanks, smiling softly. He took his seat beside the other guests, who were already laughing at Graham's jokes. Everything seemed normal at first. Graham teased the actors, poked fun at their movie scenes, and the crowd laughed along. But soon the conversation shifted. Graham leaned forward with a grin, his tone playful but sharp. "So, Keanu, you're known as Hollywood's nice guy. Right. Always so quiet, so humble. But come on, there must be something hiding behind that calm face. Don't you ever get angry? Don't you ever?" Snap, the crowd chuckled, waiting for Keanu to laugh it off. But his smile faded slightly. He paused before answering, his voice soft. "I think anger is dangerous. I've seen what it can do to people. I don't like carrying it." Graham, sensing an opening, pushed further. "Oh, come on, you must have lost it at least once. Maybe at a director? Maybe at a fan?"
"I'd
love to hear it." The audience laughed again, but uneasily. Some could feel the shift. Ken's eyes lowered. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence spread across the studio, uncomfortable and heavy. Then he lifted his head. His voice was still calm, but sharper now. "You think anger is entertainment?" Laughter died instantly. The audience froze. Graham blinked, caught off guard. "It's just a bit of fun," he said quickly, smiling to cover the tension. But Keanu didn't smile. His words came slow, measured. "It's fun for who? Not for the person who has lived through pain, not for the person who has lost family, who has carried grief, who has chosen kindness when anger was easier. Is that the story you want me to tell, so people can laugh?" The audience gasped softly. The other guests sat stiff, unsure of what to do. Graham's grin faltered, his usual confidence slipping. This was not the Keanu Reeves people were used to seeing on screen. This was a man drawing a line, live on television. The silence stretched, powerful and raw. And then, from the back of the audience, a voice whispered just loud enough to be heard, "He's right." The moment changed. What was supposed to be a joke had turned into something deeper, something real. Graham shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Keanu sat tall, his calm presence filling the room. The audience didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. What followed would become one of the most unforgettable nights in television history. Asterisk. The silence after the storm studio was frozen. People had come expecting jokes and laughter, not a moment that cut so sharp it left the air heavy. Graham Norton shifted in his chair, forcing a smile, but his eyes showed unease. He was not used to being challenged on his own stage. "Well," Graham said with a shaky laugh, "I suppose you've told me off then." A few chuckles rose from the crowd, weak and uncertain. But Keanu didn't laugh. He sat quietly, his eyes steady, his presence heavier than any punchline. The other guests shifted in their seats. One actress placed her hand over her mouth, unsure if she should speak. The musician on the couch looked down at his shoes, avoiding eye contact. Everyone could feel that something had cracked the surface of the show. Finally, Keanu spoke again. His voice was calm, almost too calm. I'm not here to entertain pain, I've lived it, and I know others in this room have too. He looked toward the audience and his gaze softened. Some of you are carrying things right now that no one else sees. Maybe grief, maybe loneliness, maybe anger you don't know what to do with. I understand that. I really do. But I also know we don't have to make it a joke. Sometimes silence is kinder than a laugh. The crowd went quiet. People leaned forward, caught not by entertainment but by honesty. Graham tried again, his voice light but thinner now.
Ow.
You're making me look like the villain here. Keanu turned to him, and for the first time, a small smile curved his lips. You're not a villain, Graham, but you have a powerful seat. What you say shapes how people think. It can lift them up or push them down. The audience murmured in agreement. Some even clapped softly, unsure if it was allowed in the middle of such a tense exchange. Graham swallowed hard. His show was about control, his timing, his jokes, his rhythm. But now he felt the control slipping, replaced by something rawer and more human. Trying to recover, he shifted the conversation. All right, let's talk about your films then. John Wick, The Matrix. Those fight scenes, surely you had moments of frustration? Keanu nodded slowly. Of course. But frustration is not anger. When I was frustrated, I learned patience. When I was tired, I kept going. When I wanted to give up, I remembered that people depend on me, on the story we're telling. Life works the same way. People are depending on us to choose kindness, even when it's harder than anger. This time the audience clapped louder. Not polite clapping, but genuine applause. Some even stood. The cameras captured faces of people, with tears in their eyes, caught off guard by the depth of the moment. Graham forced a smile again, but his hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his cards. He wasn't just hosting anymore. He was being held accountable, live in front of millions. And then, something unexpected happened. A young man in the front row stood up. His voice cracked as he said, "My brother, he died last year. I've been so angry at everyone, at myself, at the world. But listening to you now, it feels like maybe I don't have to carry it that way anymore." The audience gasped. Graham's eyes widened. The producers in the control room panicked, whispering about cutting. Too commercial, but Keanu stood, walked to the edge of the stage, and looked the young man in the eye. "Your anger is real," he said gently, "but so is your love for him. Don't let one bury the other." The young man covered his face, sobbing. Openly, strangers in the audience reached out to pat his shoulder, offering comfort. The cameras stayed rolling. The producers didn't dare cut away. Something was happening here, something beyond television. Graham sat speechless. For once in his career, he had no joke, no clever line to pull back control. All he could do was watch as his stage became a place of raw truth, and Keanu, standing there in the bright lights, looked less like a celebrity and more like a man carrying his own scars, offering them as proof that survival was possible. The truth behind the masked studio air felt different now. It was no longer the playful space of a talk show. It had become something raw, something alive. The audience sat in silence, some still wiping tears, others holding their breath as, if afraid to break the moment, Graham Norton shifted in his chair. His usual grin had softened into something more uncertain, almost defensive. He glanced toward his producers, but even they seemed frozen, unsure if interrupting would ruin what was unfolding. "Keanu," Graham said finally, his voice quieter, "you've surprised us all tonight. People come here for laughter, but you've given them, well, something else entirely." Keanu returned to his seat slowly, calm as ever. Sometimes laughter hides what we don't want to face. But sometimes it avoids. The truth. Tonight, maybe it was time for the truth. Graham tried to smile, but it faltered. He had built a career on controlling the rhythm of conversations, spinning awkwardness into comedy. Yet Keanu's words didn't leave room for that. They weren't punchlines, or weights, heavy and real. The other guests stayed quiet, almost reverent. One of them, the actress seated next to Keanu, finally leaned forward. "You've been through so much, haven't you? Is that why you speak this way?" Keanu hesitated, his eyes lowering for a moment. Then he lifted them again, his voice soft. I've lost people I loved. I've walked through grief that felt endless. You've seen that kind of pain. You learn something. You learn that kindness isn't just good, it's survival. Keeps you alive when everything else is gone. A hush swept through the audience. Some leaned forward, drawn closer by every word. Graham cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. Well, now you've got us all crying. Maybe we should lighten the mood before people at home think we've turned into a therapy session. But instead of laughter, groans came from the audience. They didn't want the moment dismissed. They wanted more. Keanu looked at Graham, his gaze steady but not harsh. Is it so bad if a late-night show becomes a place of honesty for once? Graham blinked. He had never been questioned like this on his own stage. The audience clapped suddenly. The sound growing louder, filling the room. They weren't cheering for a joke. They were cheering for the courage to speak truth where it wasn't expected. Graham leaned back, silent now, letting the energy in the room guide itself. Then, from the shadows of the audience, an older woman stood slowly. Her voice trembled, but it carried. My husband passed away last year. I've been angry at the world ever since. Tonight, hearing you, I feel like maybe I can forgive life for taking him. Maybe I can start living again. Tears rolled down her face. Strangers around her reached out to comfort her, hands on her shoulders. Keanu Single's eyes softened. He stood again, walked to the edge of the stage, and bowed his head to her. Your love for him is still here. Let that love guide you, not the anger. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. It wasn't the usual roar of entertainment. It was a release of something much deeper, as if hundreds of hearts were exhaling at the same time. Graham Single Quote's eyes darted around. He had never lost control of his show so completely. But even he couldn't deny the power of what was happening. Well, Graham said finally, his voice quieter than usual. I think you've just taught us all a lesson, Keanu, myself included. Keanu smiled gently, the tension in the room softening just a little. We're all learning.
Ow.
Every day. But then, just as the atmosphere seemed to settle, a voice shouted from the back of the audience. Sharp, angry, cutting. Stop pretending. He's just an actor. This is all fake. The crowd gasped. Heads turned toward the man who had stood, his face red with anger. He pointed at Keanu with a shaking finger. Don't fall for it. He's fooling you all. The room erupted in whispers. The energy shifted again, from inspiration to shock. Graham froze. The producers panicked. The cameras caught everything. And Keanu sat still, his eyes fixed on the man, his face unreadable. Asterisk, the outburst audience turned as one, their eyes locked on the man at the back who had broken the fragile silence. His words, loud and bitter, cut through the air like a knife. He's an actor, the man shouted again, his voice shaking with anger. You think this is real? Just putting on another performance. Don't be fooled. Across the studio, some people whispered to each other, unsure whether to argue or stay quiet. Others looked back at Keanu, waiting to see how he would respond. Graham Norton blinked, caught between his role as a host and his own rising discomfort. This wasn't in the script. Sir, please sit down, he said quickly, his voice tight. Let's not disrupt the show. But the man didn't move. He pointed at Keanu again. Why do you all treat him like a saint? He's not better than anyone here. He's just selling you a story because you want to believe in fairy tales. The tension in the studio grew heavier. Security guards began moving toward the man, but Keanu raised his hand gently, stopping them. Let him speak, Keanu said. Softly, the crowd murmured in surprise. Graham looked at Keanu like he had lost his mind. Are you sure? He's ruining the show. Keanu shook his head. No, he's part of the show now. The man sneered. Finally, you admit it. All performance, isn't it? Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. No, I'm saying that your anger matters too. I can see you. I can hear you. You're carrying something heavy, aren't you? The man froze, his face twisted, caught between fury and pain. Don't know anything about me. You're right, Keanu replied. I don't know your story, but I can see that it's hurting you. And you're trying to throw that hurt at me because you don't know where else to put it. The audience went silent again, watching the exchange like a fragile balance between explosion and healing. The man's voice cracked, softer now. My wife left me last year. She said I was too bitter, too angry. She took my kids with her. Every night since then, I've hated everyone who tells me to calm down or to be kind, because they don't know what it feels like to lose everything. His words echoed in the quiet studio. Some audience members wiped tears. Even Graham, usually quick with a witty line, sat in stunned silence. Keanu stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the man's. I do know what it feels like. I've lost family too. I've sat in the dark and thought it would never get better. I've felt that same anger. But I also learned that if I held on to it, it would eat me alive. It would take more than life had already taken. The man's lip trembled. So what am I supposed to do with it? Keanu stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his voice strong but kind. You don't have to let it go all at once. But you can start by not letting it control you tonight. You can start by letting yourself be seen instead of only being. Angry, the man covered his face with his hands. His body shook as sobs broke free. Audience members near him reached out, touching his shoulders, offering quiet comfort. Graham swallowed hard, his eyes wide. Never in his career had his show become this raw, this human. Keanu bowed his head slightly. Thank you for being honest. That takes more courage than pretending. The studio erupted in applause, not for a joke, not for entertainment, but for truth. The sound was thunderous, echoing through every corner of the room. Graham leaned back in his chair, whispering under his breath, "This is not the show I planned, but maybe it's the show we needed." Keanu returned to his seat, his expression calm again, though his eyes carried the weight of everything that had just happened. But in the control room, the producers were in chaos. Phones rang. Executives shouted. They were worried about ratings, about headlines, about whether the show had just crossed a line. And as the cameras kept rolling, one of them said into the headset, "If this goes wrong, it could end Graham's career." The Breaking Point studio was no longer buzzing with laughter, but vibrating with something rawer, heavier. The audience had seen a man break down, had seen Keanu's calm voice turn a storm of anger into tears. But while the crowd leaned toward the moment with awe, the control room above the stage was in chaos. "Cut to commercial," one producer barked. "No, keep rolling. People are glued to this," another shouted back. Graham Norton, seated tensely in his chair, was caught in the middle. His show had always thrived on control-timed laughter, well-placed jokes, smooth transitions. But tonight the script had burned away, leaving only unpredictable truth. He shuffled his cue cards nervously. "All right," he said with a forced smile, "why don't we bring things back a little? Maybe lighten the mood before people at home think we've turned into a drama series." A few audience members chuckled softly, but the sound didn't land. Most of them weren't ready to move on. They were still wrapped in the gravity of what had just unfolded. Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm but direct. "Graham, maybe tonight it's not about the mood. Maybe it's about listening." Graham blinked, his smile faltering. "But this is a talk show, Keanu. People come here to laugh, not to cry their hearts out." Keanu tilted his head. "Maybe. But people at home, they don't always laugh when the cameras are off. They go through pain, they sit alone with it. Maybe for once we can show them that they're not alone." The crowd broke into applause again, this time louder. Graham shifted uncomfortably, his role as host slipping further away in the front row. The young man who had spoken earlier lifted his head. His cheeks were streaked with tears, but his voice was steadier now. "He's right. I've been angry for months, and tonight, hearing this, I feel lighter, feel seen." The audience clapped again, some people even standing to cheer him. Graham swallowed, glancing at the cameras. The world was watching. Headlines were being written in real time. He cleared his throat, his tone sharper. "Keanu, with respect, this is my show. I decide the direction.
Wait, no.
And right now, I think we need to move away from this heavy mood." A hush fell. The audience looked at Graham, then back at Keanu. Keanu's single quote's eyes softened, but his words were unflinching. Graham, you're not wrong. This is your show. But it's also their show, the audience's. It belongs to the people who came here, the people watching at home. Maybe what they need tonight isn't another joke. Maybe they need truth. Graham's face tightened. For the first time in his long career, he looked small under the stage lights. His authority felt fragile. And then something shocking happened. Members of the audience began chanting softly, then louder, "Let him speak. Let him speak." Graham's face flushed. He looked at the cameras, then at his producers, panic flickering in his eyes. Keanu stayed calm, his presence like stone. In the storm, Graham, this isn't about taking your place. It's about using this moment for something bigger. You can resist it, or you can be part of it. The choice is yours. The room erupted in cheers again, louder than before. The energy was electric, unstoppable. Graham's hands trembled slightly as he placed his cue cards down on the table. He looked out at the sea of faces, all turned not toward him, but toward Keanu. For once, the spotlight he had always controlled had shifted, and he couldn't pull it back. His voice cracked when he spoke again, quieter now. "And what happens if this ruins me? What happens if tomorrow the papers say I lost my show?" Keanu leaned closer, his tone gentle but unyielding. "Then they'll also say you gave people something real. That matters more than keeping control of laughter." The words hit harder than any joke ever could. Graham's lips trembled, his eyes moist. But before the moment could settle, another voice shouted from the shadows of the audience. "He's not the only one who's lost control of their life." All eyes turned. A woman in her 40s stood up, her hands shaking. Her voice broke as she cried out, "I lost my daughter last year. I haven't spoken about it to anyone. I came tonight hoping to laugh, but now I realize maybe what I needed was to finally say it out loud." The studio gasped. The woman covered her face, sobbing openly. Keanu rose from his chair once more, moving slowly toward the edge of the stage. "Thank you," he said gently. "You've just given more courage to everyone here than you can imagine." The audience erupted again, clapping, cheering, crying. The walls of the studio seemed too small to contain the emotion boiling inside. Graham sat frozen, his career balancing on a knife's edge. As his show transformed completely before his eyes, asterisk. The night the world remembered studio was no longer a stage for comedy. It had turned into something deeper, something people would talk about long after the lights dimmed. The laughter and witty games that usually defined Graham Norton's show had been replaced by tears, raw honesty, and a strange unity that bound strangers together. The woman who had confessed her grief still stood trembling, her sobs quieting as people near her held her shoulders. Graham himself looked overwhelmed, his usual control slipping completely away. Keanu stood at the edge of the stage, not larger than life, not a Hollywood hero, simply a man willing to carry truth. His voice was steady as he spoke. "Hate is everywhere. Grief, loss, loneliness. We pretend it doesn't exist because it makes us uncomfortable. But tonight proves something. When we share it, when we look each other in the eye, it doesn't destroy us. It connects us." The audience clapped again, not with wild cheers, but with long, sustained applause, as if they didn't want to stop. Some were crying openly, others smiling through tears. Graham finally spoke, his voice low, shaken. "I thought people came here to escape their problems, to laugh for a little while and forget, but maybe forgetting isn't what we need." Turned toward Keanu, and his expression carried both humility and exhaustion. "You've changed my show tonight. I don't know if the world will call it a disaster or a miracle, but I can't deny what I just saw." Keanu nodded gently. "It's not about me, Graham. It's about everyone here. You gave them a place, and they filled it with truth. That's not a disaster. That's brave." Graham blinked rapidly, his eyes glistening. The audience clapped louder, some standing to cheer. For once the host wasn't the center of attention, and he didn't fight it. He let the moment breathe. The cameras kept rolling. Millions watching at home saw every tear, every word, every fragile silence. And something remarkable happened. Social media lit up instantly. Clips of the confrontation, of the man's breakdown, of the woman's confession spread like wildfire. Hashtags about kindness, grief, and truth trended worldwide before the show had even finished. Inside the studio, one last unexpected moment came. The man who had shouted in anger earlier, the one who confessed about losing his family, stood again. This time his voice was quiet, almost broken. "Thank you," he said, looking at Keanu. "I don't know if I'll ever heal, but tonight, for the first time, I want to try." The audience clapped softly for him, not in mockery, but in support. He sat down again, his head bowed, but not in shame. It was different now. Graham rose slowly from his chair. His voice was hoarse. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think tonight our show wasn't about Hollywood or movies. It was about us. All of us. And maybe that's the most important show we'll ever do." Applause thundered across the studio, echoing so loud it seemed to shake the walls. The producers in the control room, once panicked, now sat in stunned silence. They knew this episode would go down in history, not because of the jokes, but because of the truth. Keanu, humble as always, bowed his head. "Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for letting me listen. That's all I wanted." The cameras faded, the red lights dimmed, but the energy in the room stayed. People hugged strangers, wiped each other's tears, and walked out different than when they had entered later. Headlines would explode across the world. Keanu Reeves transforms live show into unforgettable night of truth. Graham Norton loses control, gains history. Audience members share grief and emotional moment watched by millions. But when journalists searched for Keanu afterward, he was already gone. No interviews, no spotlight, no explanations. Just as quietly as he had entered, he left his work finished, his message left behind like a seed planted in every heart. For him, it was never about fame. It was about respect, resilience, and kindness. And on that night, the world remembered those things more than it remembered any joke.